Hello, everyone, and happy St. Patrick for those who celebrate that, and happy Friday for those who celebrate the, coming of the Friday. And welcome to the second meeting of the Turba program for this coming spring break. Well, it is spring break here, so I'm just rejoicing. So this spring we have been discussing already a little bit of late antique alchemy, and we are gonna talk today about medieval alchemy, and the last session will be on early modern alchemy, and that will be on the 31st of March. So first, just the usual round. Thanks for the support of the Society for the History of Alchemy and Chemistry, who are providing the Zoom account. I note that this session is also broadcast live on the Shack YouTube channel. So I'm your host, Joe Hedison from University of Oxford. And I will be taking questions either by signaling your intention in the chat or raising your hand virtually. I would like to add that Diego will be talking, well, actually I didn't ask him, but I hope it's around 35 minutes, and then we'll start the discussion. So let me introduce our speaker today, Diego Gorini Gonzalez, who is a PhD student in medieval philosophy at the University of Salento and University of Cologne. So it's a dual doctoral degree, and he's focusing his research on Pseudo-Lullian alchemy. He holds a bachelor's degree in classics and a master's degree in philosophy from the University of Florence. And Diego will be talking about the theory of transmutation in the Pseudo-Lullian Codicillus. So Diego, when you would like to take over, please begin.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you to the Society. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I appreciate it, and I have to apologize in advance because my English is not great. So if there is something you don't understand, you can always ask me. I will try to explain myself as best as I can. So I want to say that I sent to you the handout of the presentation. You will find the text we are going to be reading is in English. So in the chat, you can find it. I hope everybody can open it without problems. And I'm going to share my my PowerPoint presentation with you. So okay, just a second. It's taking a second. Yes. Please tell me if you can see it.
Yes, we can see it well. So.
Perfect. So I'm going to be talking about Pseudo-Lullian alchemy. I want to give a little overall overview of what Pseudo-Lullian alchemy is, what the text in particular is, the Codicillus, and then I'm going to talk about the theory of transmutation in this particular text. And I want to read with you the text itself. I don't have a speech, so I would like to read some sections of the text with you together and then arrive to a conclusion. And so the alchemical corpus attributed to Ramon Llull. Let's start with that. So Ramon Llull, a Catalan philosopher from the 13th century, didn't write any alchemical treatise. And in fact, he opposed the possibility of transmutation. But there is a legend about Llull the alchemist, which formed later in the Renaissance, for example, and in the early modern period. But Llull didn't write any alchemical treatise, so that's the first thing we have to remember. This corpus consists of more than 150 works written between the 14th and the 17th century, so it's a very big corpus. And the earliest and most important work of the corpus is called the Testamentum, which is actually edited by Michela Pereira, so you can find it, you can read it. It's anonymous, and it is actually not explicitly attributed to Llull. Around the Testamentum, which is this big, important text, more or less half a dozen treatises were written. Among them, the Codicillus, which is the text I am going to talk to you about, perhaps by the same author. The explicit attribution to Lull of this corpus of texts begins actually a little bit later with the Liber de Secretis Naturae, another very important book in the alchemical tradition. But that's around the middle of the 14th century. The entire corpus is characterized by the search of the elixir of long life rather than by the transmutation of metal. So if you watch the presentation by Megan Allen, who talked about medical alchemy in Roger Bacon, that's the tradition in which the alchemical corpus attributed to Ramon Lull is in, more or less. Many themes are going to come up again here. So the Codicillus. The Codicillus is actually a very fortunate text in the history of alchemy because there are more than 50 manuscripts, and there were at least 5 editions in the early modern period, and it was translated into the 5, let's say, European languages: Spanish, French, Italian, German, and English. So it was a pretty fortunate text, even though nowadays it's not very well known. The author, again, is anonymous, but he was probably, we can hypothesize that he was probably a physician trained at the Montpellier Medical School, a very important medical school at the time. The Codicillus presents itself as a systematic compendium of the theory and, above all, the alchemical practice of the Pseudo-Lullian Testamentum. So it's kind of the son or a synthesis of the bigger, more important text, the Testamentum. Actually, Codicillus means little codex, right? So it's like it presents itself as a synthesis, again, as a, yeah. In the first part, which is the part that I am going to read with you and analyze, it's called the Theorica. The book attempts to give a theoretical basis to the alchemical practice based on a careful combination of various philosophical, medical, and alchemical ideas. The most important names, the most important sources for the Codicillus are Arnau de Vilanova, a Catalan physician, a mystic and prophet, Aristotle, of course, Albert the Great, and especially De Mineralibus, some works by Ramon Lull, and 2 texts which are very important in the Latin alchemical tradition: the Summa Perfectionis by Pseudo Geber and the Rosarium Philosophorum. Now, there is one thing that we have to keep in mind. Again, the relationship between alchemy and medicine is very, very close. And it will come out from this presentation how close that actually was. I want to read with you.
Lo quise hacer, pero tuve que checar los datos para que no hubiera.
I am hearing something. Are you hearing that too? There is a voice. Anyway, the Philosopher's Stone is an object that can be studied as the human body is studied by physicians. So that's the first similarity, right? The Philosopher's Stone is analogous to the body. It is possible to apply the stone as a medicine to human bodies, and therefore there is not only an analogical, but also kind of a physiological correspondence. The precise relationship between the body, the human body, and the Philosopher's Stone is not well defined still. That's subject to research. The principles of the alchemical art are reducible to the principles of medicine. That's the most important thing we have to keep in mind, that for the author of the Codicillus, if you are a physician, a good physician, you should be able to understand the principles of alchemy. And if you are an alchemist, you should be able to reduce or to integrate the principles of alchemy to the principles of medicine. Alchemy is a science that studies the secrets of nature and belongs to the art of the quadrivium. So for the author, alchemy actually should be probably taught in universities. Maybe you all know that alchemy was never taught in universities, but for this author, alchemy had an epistemological status, let's say, similar to that of medicine. So if it belongs to the quadrivium, maybe it should be taught in the universities. But the difference is that alchemy and medicine, between alchemy and medicine, is that alchemy is a gift, is a donum of grace, reserved only for the elect. So in that regard, it's different from medicine. Alchemy is divided, for this author, into a theoretical part and a practical part. In Latin, theorica and practica. Just as in the medical tradition, alchemy studies internal or invisible aspects of matter through external signals and manipulations. So this is for this author, alchemy has a semiotics, let's say, similar to that of medicine. Just as a physician looks at a patient and tries to infer what's the problem with that body, just as that, the alchemist has to be attentive to different physical aspects that he can grasp with his senses. Human reason can penetrate the secrets of nature only through approximate and probabilistic judgments. So it's not an exact art. The alchemist's reasoning must therefore be regulated by sound and effective principles. And what are those principles is what we are going to analyze here with more detail, the principles. The principles of the alchemical art are of three types: material, practical, and demonstrative. Now, here I did some little diagram, and the Codicillus is a very, let's say, systematic kind of text. Maybe it's not very systematic for the modern reader. Maybe for us it is very chaotic, but for the average alchemist of the 14th century, it was actually very systematic, very schematic. And you can see that there are three kinds of principle, right? Materialia, demonstrativa, practicalia, three kinds. And each kind of principle, each type of principle has four components. The material aspects are quicksilver, sulfur, salt, and vitriol. Okay, so those are the material aspects. The demonstrative aspects are the four colors, the classic four colors of alchemy. Actually, it is from this text on that those four colors became classic. So that's the legacy of this text, let's say, one of its legacies. The nigredo, albedo, cinericium, and rubedo. That is the black, the white. The cinericium is kind of a yellow kind of color, and the rubedo, which is red. And the practical aspects, the practical principles, solvere, which is to solve, abluere, which is like to wash, reducere, which is to reduce, and figere, which is to fix in English. Now we can start reading the text, and I hope that now it makes a little bit more of sense together with the little diagrams. Text number 1. We are making the form of our compendium threefold, consisting of three kinds of principles, along with all the rules of this art, which will shine forth like effective instruments and serve not only for the aforementioned, that is, not only for creating the Philosopher's Stone, but also for any given composition of medicine, so that truth may be revealed and obtained more quickly and directly. So the intention of this alchemist is actually to offer a very quick and direct method to create the Philosopher's Stone. And not only the Philosopher's Stone, but every kind of medicine. So it's very ambitious as a text. First, the text number 2. First, it must be understood how from the already stated principles, many other principles are formed, which we will reveal in detail, according to how the aforementioned material principles evolve according to their nature and are successively and gradually modified by means of certain operations and works directed and governed by practical principles, which are guided by intellectual doctrine through demonstrative principle. Now, this passage is very interesting, because it joins together the three kinds of principle in one operation. So the alchemist, according to this alchemist, the alchemist has at disposition material things, right? There are the quicksilver, the sulfur, the salt, and the vitriol, and many others, but he starts with those four principles. And he has four operations by means of which he can transform or transmute these principles, these material principles, into many other material principles with the objective with the goal of obtaining the Philosopher's Stone. And how can he be sure that he's doing the right thing or the wrong thing, if he's doing the opus, the alchemical opus, right or wrong? Through the means of his or her senses. That is by colors in this case. So this text, this little section is very important because we can see that the intention of these alchemists was actually to offer a very concise way, a very unified way of obtaining the Philosopher's Stone. Now, I have to say, I choose the title of this presentation, the theory of transmutation in the Codicillus, because we are focusing only in the first part of the text, the Theoretica, which I think is the most interesting part of the text. But actually, the text is three quarters of the text is devoted to the practical aspect. So actually, the intentions of this author was actually to offer a practical way to arrive at the Philosopher's Stone. But the theoretical part is just as important, just more concise. Okay, it's very densely packed, let's say. Now, as you can see, even a 16th, 15th century reader of this text very clearly understood that this text was actually very schematic. You can see here, again, a 16th, maybe 15th century diagram, which basically replicates what I show you here, right? Actually, my inspiration was this diagram, this older diagram. And you can see that it basically states this. There are three principles, and the whole theory of transmutation is divided or can be understood through these three principles. But now we have to delve more deeply into these principles to see that this kind of uniformity or this kind of, I call it symbolic means to understand alchemy, or this theoretical will to systematize and schematize the alchemical practice, actually breaks down when you go to the lab. But the effort was appreciated. As you can see, the material principles, again, the sulfur, the quicksilver, and the salt and the vitriol, can be understood in, let's call it a metaphysical way, let's call it. Because, why? Because the sulfur is actually a natural material principle. Why? Because it is natural inside and out. So it's like an extremely pure and natural principle, let's call it. Which has in it the virtus innata, the innate virtue. We will see what this means later on. While the quicksilver is actually unnatural. Why? Because it is natural in the inside, natural within, but outside it is unnatural. And the artifacts, the alchemist has actually the goal to purify quicksilver. Okay, and the other two principles, sal and vitriol, are actually against nature. Let's read text number 3. The fact is that such quicksilver is not completely natural in its substance. That is, it is in its initial state of reception, nor will it be until it has been fully purified by the ingenuity, by the science, by the art of the alchemist. Okay, so that's one of the things the alchemist has to do. He has to purify quicksilver. Let's read text number 4. From these material principles, metallic love, amor metallicus, is generated, by which the generation of the desired object is achieved when their own individual natures are bound together by a natural agreement. So you can see that this text uses some
You seem to be, yeah, you muted?
I am not muted. Do you listen to me?
Yes,
Yeah,
now I can hear you.
it's okay now.
Okay,
Sorry.
perfect. So again, from these two principles, from quicksilver and sulfur, metallic love is generated. So we need the metallic love to generate the Philosopher's Stone. So that's a very interesting, at least it is a very interesting kind of language, I think. Text number 5. From which material principle arises, so that is salt and vitriol, the corruption of the desired object, to the extent that the worse nature wins over the better nature of sulfur and quicksilver. So there is this tripartition of the principles. Okay, it's a kind. Actually, the in naturalis name, the category unnatural is not really precise. It's not that quicksilver was natural. It was just a way to categorize these substances according to their function. Okay. And again, the quicksilver, it was also called spiritus, and it had in itself the virtus fluens. We will see what this meant later on. The demonstrative principles, the colors, the 4 colors. Let's read the text. Are those signs which are emitted more fixed in habit by the material principles successively in decoctions. And there are here 4 principal colors, namely nigredo, albedo, cinericium, rubedo. And from this, as byproducts, emanate as many mixtures of colors as can be thought up in all of nature. But they do not remain in effect, except only the 4 aforementioned, as the guiding principles of the entire process. That is, the alchemist in the alchemical opus will be able to see 4 stable colors, these 4. So at each stage of the transmutation, he will have these guiding principles to know if he is doing the opus in the right way. But that doesn't mean that he only sees these 4 colors. There are actually a lot of many other colors, but more ephemerous. If they pass on. They are not as stable as these 4 colors. And that's very interesting, I think, because we can see that in alchemy there was this notion of continuity and of gradation between at least the colors, but it also exists in the practice, in the practical principles. And again, this text is famous, I think, mostly because of this distinction of this let's say classic partition of the demonstrative principles in 4 colors. I think, by the way, just as a note, at the medical school of Montpellier, there was a physician who is now studied because of the medical semiotics he used to treat patients. And I think that these demonstrative principles are kind of a way of imitating the work of physicians. The alchemists try to give some dignity, let's say, to the alchemical art by using semiotics in their work. Okay. Now let's see the practical principles. There are 4 principles. Okay. So in theory, in the theory of transmutation, there are 4 practical principles, right? Solvere, abluere, reducere, figere. And actually, each stage, each operation corresponds to one stage of the alchemical opus. So the practical aspect of alchemy can be divided in 4 parts, and to each part corresponds this very nice, very elegant principle, right? The first part is to solve, the second part is to wash, the third part is to reduce, and the fourth part is to fix. But when we go to see the actual alchemical practice, we see that this symmetry and this nice, elegant way of dividing the opus breaks down, because actually for each practical principle, there are many other practical principles, which is this column to the right. Let's see text. Let's read text number 8. From each of these principles depends several other particular practical principles concerning the action of fires and their informations, such as the natural, against nature, and artificial. So what he wants to say here is that there are 4 stable operations. There are 4 more abstract operations which the alchemist has to know. But in practice, there will be many other more, of course. And things get more complicated when you go to the lab and actually try to obtain the philosopher's stone. So to this point, I want you to notice that there is even, I think, some numerology in the partition of the theory. There is 3 kinds of principles. Each principle has 4 parts, so the 3 and the 4 is very important. So I want you to notice the will of the alchemist to systematize the theory, because again, the Codicillus is trying to take the previous alchemical tradition, coming from the Summa Perfectionis, coming from the Arabic alchemy, coming from the Testamentum, the Rosarium Philosophorum, and so on. He's trying to take all of this alchemical tradition and offer, let's say, scholastic way, a scholastic presentation of all these materials. So even though for us it may seem complicated because we are not familiar with all the text behind this systematization, for the average alchemist, this was a very neat presentation of the theory, right? Although, again, when you go to the practice, things get more complicated. Now, let's pass to something that I call the science of the middle and extremes, because now we are going to see actually how all these principles come together. It is not explicitly stated in the Codicillus that there is such a thing as a science of these middles and extremes, but you can, I put some of the most important phrases here. We are not going to read them all, that exemplify the idea that this alchemist, and probably also the alchemist author of the Testamentum, maybe other alchemists too, they were working with kind of metaphysical or metaphysics or epistemology. I don't know how to call it. If you have some suggestion, I would like to know it, about how things change. How is it that you go from gold and silver and you pass to other material principles and you obtain sulfur and quicksilver? So this is kind of like a science of evolving things. Okay, so let's read just a couple of them so you get a sense of what the alchemist thought. Let's read the first one. Middle things are turned into extremes, and extremes are gradually resolved into middle things. That looks very cryptic, right? But he's talking about things that evolve, things that change with operations. Let's read the second one. There is no transition from one extreme to another, except through a middle. This actually comes from Aristotle. So from the metaphysics, if I am correct. So again, it's like a kind of trying to use some metaphysical tools, some philosophical tools to understand change in alchemy. Okay, let's read just the last one, this one that says G holds in the middle. G holds the nature of the middle of the conjunction of B and M retains the nature of the middle of the conjunction by which G is converted into R, and R the nature of the kindred middle by which nature is converted into the nature of Y. So it's just a way of saying things have to go from one extreme to another extreme, passing through all the middles. He's saying that material principles have to follow some rules, and these rules have to accommodate the course of nature. Now, there is this diagram that I made, and this diagram is actually not found in the manuscripts, but it is talked about in the text. So I am trying to reconstruct this diagram, which puts together all the ingredients. Let's say it puts together all the principles, and let's study it a little bit. It is called rota alphabetalis because it uses the letters of the alphabet to imitate, again, the course of nature, the cursus naturae. And as you can see, it starts from letter A, which is God, and it goes through the material principles, which are in black, in color black. Mercurius, sal, vitriol, argentum. Argentum in this case is silver. Gold. Then it goes to the white principles, which are the elements, the earth, water, air, fire. Then it goes to the extremes, the seeds, the most let's say the most basic ingredients of nature, of the metals at least, sulfur, quicksilver, and some kind of ferments, to rise again up and go to the elixir, the philosopher's stone, the medicine, the thing that we are looking for. And at the top, very close to God, there is the multiplication. That is that operation which the alchemist actually search. Multiply something, multiply virtue, multiply gold, multiply things. And as you can see, to each principle corresponds, again, to each material principle corresponds a practical principle. In black, solvere, the solution, to solve. So I say that in this diagram, it all comes together because, as you can see, there are the material principles, the first material principles, which are in black, and which correspond to solvere, to the first practical aspect. So you have the material principles, the demonstrative principles, and the practical principles all in one diagram. And it all kind of makes sense, at least to my eyes. I don't know, maybe I am too much into the text, but now it makes sense to me looking at the diagram. And as you can see, the job of the alchemist, basically, according to this author, to the Codicillus, is to go through the rota alpha vitalis, go through the circle, going from B to Y, without let's say, jumping any step, going step by step, respecting nature in this sense, using the practical principles to transform the material principles, guided by the colors, guided by the demonstrative principles. So let's just read the text, and with this I will finish. Let's read text number 9. For this is the true course of nature. An art endeavors to imitate nature as much as it can. It should be pursued in this way, that nature, which can fulfill the aptitude of its matter, never passes from one extreme to another until it first completes every medium by successive operations. So it's basically what I tried to explain before. Let's read text number 10. And therefore, my dear friend, you must undoubtedly observe such a nature of the mediums, of the middle things, before you attempt anything in the mastery, that is in the alchemical art, leaving nothing out of its own mediums, until nature herself gradually reduces metals to their first beings, primum esse, namely sulfur and quicksilver, which are the proper seeds of metals, and more closely connected with which you will make those precious transmutations, the multiplication of things. Let's read text number 11. More purified than others, two are found, namely gold and silver, without which this art cannot be completed, since in them is the purest substance of sulfur purified by the ingenuity of perfect nature. Therefore, their father is the sun and their mother is the moon, because from those bodies, prepared with their sulfur, or medicine can be extracted, and not without them. So the extremes, in this case, are not actually gold and silver. The extremes the alchemist is looking for is sulfur and quicksilver. But he starts the opus with salt, vitriol, gold, and silver. Okay, and he's trying to extract a pure form of quicksilver and sulfur from them, going through this rota alpha vitalis. And finally, let's read text number 12. And the more they hold of the nature of quicksilver, the greater their perfection, such as gold and quicksilver. And the more they hold of sulfur, the greater their corruption, like the other metals. So maybe some of you are familiar with the theory of quicksilver alone. Basically, this is it. The author simply is trying to say that you start with gold and silver because they have the purest quality of sulfur by nature. They have this very purified sulfur, and the alchemist has to purify the quicksilver in them. And it is easier to act according to nature and to go through this rota alpha vitalis if you start with those perfect or more perfect metals, which are gold and silver, to extract again quicksilver and sulfur. So I'm gonna stop here. I have more material if you are curious about what to do with the fires and so on, but I'm gonna stop here because it's a lot to take in one sitting. And if you have any doubts, I hope I can answer. Again, the purpose of this text is to schematize the theory of alchemy in as much as elegant way as possible. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you, Diego. And could you close the
Yes.
the PowerPoint for now at least?
Yes.
This was really a really interesting and very comprehensive presentation of the Codicillus, which I think you made it as clear as it is possible to be, given the relative obscurity of Pseudo-Lullian alchemy at the moment. Well, I will just start with just two general questions. One was whether you're planning to translate this, because you actually are very good at English. I mean, I was impressed by the English that you wrote this in. So it wouldn't be a bad thing to do. And the other question was more my interest, which is like what this against nature means, and just to give us an overview of exactly what he means by that. So.
Okay, thank you, Joe. Thank you. Actually, I have to be honest. I used a lot of Google in the translations.
It worked. It worked very well. So.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, the thing with translating alchemical text, I think, is the terminology, because I am most of the time I am unsure of what term to use, even in my own language, which is Spanish or Italian. I am very unsure. So I would like to translate it eventually, actually, because I think it's necessary to offer a more digestible form of this text, because the Latin, again, is very obscure, I have to admit. So let's hope I will be able to translate it. And against nature, as you can see, the author uses a lot of let's say the epistemology of the medical tradition. If you go to see the oldest medical texts or treatises, or the most widely used medical treatises in the Latin West, coming obviously through the Arabic translations, there already exists this distinction between naturales, res naturales, res in naturales, and res contra naturam. So the distinction already existed. In the case of this author, at least, contra naturam means the different things depending on the kind of principle. If it is a material principle, it means that it destroys matter. For example, the salt and the vitriol are used to destroy, or to go to reduce, and to go to the putrefaction, let's say, of the gold and the silver. So that's what it's meant. But if you go to the practical principles, contra naturam would be against nature, would be to use fire in a way that it's not according to the benefit of the practice. So it varies according to the type of principle. It's not, but the interesting thing is that he tries, at least the author tries to generate a more abstract view of things, right, and to divide in those categories. I hope I was able to.
Thank you. Jenny has a question. Please, Jenny.
Thank you very much, Diego. I'm very happy that somebody is working on this important text. By the way, I would recommend just translate it as codicil. And it's interesting, and this actually leads on to my question, because a codicil is, of course, an addition to a will. And the testamentum is the will, and the codicil is deliberately an appendage to it. So this leads on to my question, which is really about the relationship between the codicil and the testamentum. The fact that it's called the codicil immediately suggests that the writer was deliberately trying to write a follow-on to the testamentum, regardless of whether it's the same author, although it's certainly suggestive it might be the same author, but it could be a disciple. I want to know what you think about the connections between these two texts. For instance, do you detect the same approach to transmutation in both, or is it possible that the writer of the Codicillus, who could, of course, be the Magister Testamenti, to use Michele Pereira's term, might have changed his ideas a little bit in time? And just because that's kind of a massive question, I'll just home it in on a couple of possible directions. One is the use of medicine. So I always took a lot of the use of medicine in the Testamentum and in the Codicillus to be analogical when talking about transmutation. So the medicine is the elixir, and a lot of the examples which are drawn from scholastic medicine are deliberately being used in the context of transmutation. So it's healing bodies, but it's metallic bodies, not human bodies. And I mean, it's a little while since I read the Codicillus, but I think almost every single reference to medicine is specifically about transmutation. And given that, the terms, naturam, innaturalis, and contra naturam are, of course, all terms taken from medicine. Think of the Galenic non-naturals, there'd be the innaturalis, the contra naturam, that's disease which kills the body. So he's using very medical language, but possibly in a non-medical context. And that's exactly what the writer of the Testamentum does as well. Of course, I've sort of tried to argue this myself, that the recipe in the Testamentum seems to be describing corrosive sublimate of mercury, which you make from salt and mercury and vitriol. And that would definitely be very bad for metals indeed if you tried to dissolve them. So that's the basis of my question. How far do you think the two texts are related? Do you think medicine is being used consistently in the two texts? And I'm also wondering, like, that really nice diagram you put together, it reminded me a lot of the figura practica in the Practica Testamenti. It starts with the same ingredients, but then it differs a bit after that. And I mean, seeing your diagram, it really did look as though whoever wrote the Codicillus was using the figure in the Testament as a starting point and just kind of elaborating it a little differently. Anyway, I realize I've said a lot, so I'll shut up, but please, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how these important treatises are connected. Thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. Actually, it's really nice to meet you. As you can imagine, I read your book, and that it's one of the sources I actually go back time and time again. It's great. Yeah, absolutely. And well, to answer the first question, the relationship between the Testamentum and the Codicillum. Actually, thanks for the tip. That's a great name. It would be a great name too. And I try to focus on this talk only on the Codicillum, because the Testamentum is a huge text. It's like summa of alchemy. It's a very, to me at least, it's a very complicated text, much more comprehensive than the Codicillus. The Codicillus is like this big, and the Testamentum is this big. So, but I think that the Testamentum was written first, and the Codicillus, of course. I am not completely sure it was by the same author, to be honest. Here's the thing: the theory in the theory and the practice in the Codicillus is very corresponding to the theory and practice in the Testamentum. It's just like let's say a shortened version of the Testamentum. If you look at the guidelines in the more general way, the thing I am not convinced, or the reason I am not completely convinced it's by the same author, or at least not by the same author in the same temporal range, let's say. Maybe it's the same author, but by 10 years or, I don't know, 20 years apart, is the terminology. There are cases in which the terminology changes in the Codicillus, and there is no good reason for changing the terminology. I mean, that's the only thing it seems weird to me, that if you are the same author, you would be more consistent in the terminology you are using, especially if you are writing like a synthesis of or how do you say, yes, a shortened text of your bigger text. That's the thing I am not really convinced. Another thing is that in the Codicillus there are no diagrams. There is absolutely no diagram. It's like maybe I have no good explanation as why this text has no diagrams. There is only one, let's say, textual reference to the diagram I am trying to reconstruct, but there are no other uses of diagrams. So that's weird too. But in general, they are very corresponding. And I would just say that the Codicillus is actually much more clear. It's maybe this would be a good hypothesis that I've been thinking about. Maybe the Testamentum was a very big first great work by this author, and it was not very well understood by the students. And maybe he tried to write a shorter version of the same text, leaving some things out, trying to use a more clear and consistent terminology. That would be a good explanation, maybe, because I do think the author was trained in the Montpellier Medical School of Medicine, because I did not talk about this in this talk, but the most prominent source down to the textual level is Arnau de Villanova. The presence of Arnau de Villanova in the Codicillus is even greater than in the Testamentum, much more prominent. I mean, actually, I have to say this, Nicholas of Cusa read the Codicillus, and he actually thought that the Codicillus was much more easily attributed to Arnau de Villanova than to Lull. So that's weird. And actually, well, it actually makes sense, right? Because again, the text, the Codicillus, is very much impregnated by Arnaldian medicine. Another thing, I hope I hope I am being clear here. if I am not being clear, please interrupt. But the idea, the core idea in the theory and of transmutation is the humidum radicale, the radical humidity, and the radical humidity is very prominent too in the Testamentum. So I think that's what anchors together these two works, the really important place of preserving the radical humidity in the material principles. Maybe some of you are familiar with this concept. It comes obviously from Avicenian medicine and even maybe before. But it was Arnau de Villanova who actually systematized this in a very comprehensible way. And the source for the humidum radicale in the Codicillus is certainly Arnau de Villanova. So I think there is a lot of work to do to determine whether it is the same author. Probably it is, but I just think separated by a rather long temporal window, I think. And the diagram, you also asked me something about the diagram.
Oh, it actually fits in very well with the working hypothesis that you just suggested, which is that perhaps the writer started with the Testamentum and then elaborated, because that's how the figure looks to me. It looks like he started with a figure from the Testamentum, but then sort of deviated a bit. Thank you very much.
Actually, I have to say just this. Actually, the way to reconstruct the diagram is actually looking back at the alphabet in the Testamentum. So the link is there, is perfectly there. Yes, you cannot reconstruct the diagram without looking at the alphabet in the Testamentum. It actually gives how do you say that the Codicillus is actually supposing that the reader has the Testamentum there in front of the disciple. So yes, the relationship is anyway very, very, very close. Yes, I hope I answered.
Very well. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, questions. Whoever would like to ask further questions on this. Well, I'm assuming this Arnau Villanova is referring to. I mean, well, there was a book by Chiara Cristiani, right, on the
Yes.
On the radical. Was it a translation? I think on the
Yes.
actual.
Yes, the book by Chiara Cristiani is the introduction to the critical edition of the Tractatus de Humido Radicali by Arnau, and she actually mentions the Testamentum, and the Testamentum is a very important part of the tradition of that concept. She doesn't mention the Codicillus. It is a minor work, nevertheless. But yes, at that stage in time, I think that the Humidum Radicale was a very, very important concept for alchemy, but it was not further developed. It was like taken as a very a complete concept, let's say. The alchemists saw the Humidum Radicale as something that Arnau had actually clarified, and they took it for good. It was a good element in the theory, let's say, but they didn't, at least to my knowledge, in the corpus, in the Pseudo-Lullian corpus, they didn't develop further the Humidum Radicale.
I would note just before I pass to Gary that obviously this is I think it's authentic Arnau Villanova that we're talking about in on the radical humidity. I'm just wondering if he the Codicillus author also followed the Pseudo-Arnoldian corpus, or he was interested in that. Of course, that's more towards alchemy than it was than the radical humility treatise was. So he expanded on that.
Yes, that's actually one of the most interesting aspects of the text, that the author uses as sources both authentic Arnaldian works and the Rosarium Philosophorum. Actually, the relationship between the Codicillus and the Rosarium is not very clear. I think the Rosarium precedes the Codicillus, but it's not that clear. And he uses both. The author uses both texts. The author uses also the Summa Perfectionis and Encyclopedian treatises and other. It uses Albert the Great. So it's a great mixture of theories and ideas. And the thing is, the Codicillus, honoring its name, it takes very textual citations. So the author modifies one or two things when it's proper to adapt the sources to alchemy, but it follows very closely the text in the Arnaldian text, the words in the Arnaldian text, the authentic one. Yes.
Okay, Gary has a question. Can you unmute yourself? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for a spectacular talk. I mean, it was just so clear and so well presented. We're looking forward to many, many years of your contributions to this overall community, to be sure. One thing that I noted was that in the present, the concept of the transition state in chemistry is one of the most important concepts that we teach. And the way you presented it, this author already was thinking in those terms, that chemistry isn't a magic thing. It's continuous from the substrates to the products, but it goes through various transition states along the way. I thought that was one of the most interesting things from a professional chemist. I'm professor of chemical physics. So anyway, you want to comment on that, but thanks so much.
Thank you. I am happy that I was able to explain myself, at least in my limited possibilities. But that actually, I think, is the most interesting aspect too in the text. That's my personal favorite too, because and maybe this is a good conclusion to the talk. The Rota Alphabetalis, what wants to make clear is that the alchemist has to use the practical principles to solvere, abluere, and so on, with a lot of care of not killing the humidum radicale. So the alchemist has to be like very efficient and very skilled in the manipulation of fire. It's like the Promethean aspect of alchemist, right? So he has to manipulate fire and manipulate all the instruments he has to achieve the transformations without killing the most important and the constant in matter, which is the humidum radicale again. So that's very interesting, because it's like the constant in the change, and you see all the colors, and you use the principles, and you manipulate fire. So yes, I think too that this particular way of looking at matter was, of course, radicated in Aristotelian views. Of course, it has a lot of depths to scholastic natural philosophy and so on. But I think there is a special thing to alchemists in how they view matter and how they thought about transition not only from one idea to another idea, but from one piece of matter to another piece of matter. So that's very interesting to me too, and I think it deserves a little bit more of exploring.
Okay, thank you for that. Peter Oakley has a question. So Peter.
Hi. Mine's slightly minor in relation to the the very erudite questions that have come before, but there's something that keeps turning up in these texts, and I'm quite intrigued about it. And this time where it's talking about mercury, and it's identifying this fact about the fact that natural mercury isn't mercury, and it has to be turned by the art into mercury, which until relatively recently I wasn't that fussed about. I thought it was a sort of more of a philosophical thing than a practical thing. But I've been writing a paper for the next edition of Ambix, in which I've been looking at a lot of mercury activity, and it's quite apparent that unless you actually refine it, it gets quite muddy and dirty quite quickly. And actually mercury in the environment, which is how quite a lot of it is still floating around in California, sorry for those who are there, it isn't mercury as it's sort of perfected. And that statement seems to be a bit more practical to when I'm reading it now. I see, oh yes, it's sort of a ammunition to people saying, by the way, the mercury that you see isn't really as mercury as it can be, because once you've purified it properly, it behaves quite differently. And I think that was one of the things that I found quite fascinating about it. Amongst all the other things, the talk I found great, but that one bit sort of hit me in the face on the basis of, so they actually know that this sort of mercury it has a tendency, and this picks up on Gary's point, because it stops becoming as extreme a mercury as it can be and starts becoming, basically it sort of becomes an amalgam with things from the environment, or it gets contamination in it, and because of that it doesn't run as quickly and it doesn't shine as much, so it's basically not as mercury-ish as mercury should be. It's not as quick and it's not as silver, which, you know, considering the archaic name, is quite interesting in there. So it makes me wonder about how extremely perceptive this is on a practical basis as well as a theoretical basis, because these things keep getting dropped in, and that one just seems very interesting as a comment. But I am aware that this keeps on sort of going backwards and forwards, and I'm sure Jenny will be able to make a comment about the extent to which you start getting this sulfur that you see isn't the real sulfur, it's somewhere else, and you know, mercury isn't. But that one I was starting to wonder whether actually what they're talking about is, don't trust mercury that you get, it really has to be recently refined to behave like mercury.
Yes, thank you.
A comment than yeah, I don't really expect a response from it, but it was just a sort of, it's quite interesting that there's all these small pieces in there as well as the grand you know, the grand narrative that's occurring.
Yes, thank you for your comment. Actually, I think it's one of the aspects that I am most curious about, because this is a work in progress. So I am in my second year of my PhD, so this is a work in progress, and I want actually to go through the practical part of the treatise to see how that works out. I am curious actually about how that purifying of mercury actually happens in the lab, and I would appreciate very much a comment from Jennifer, because I am very curious about that too. So if she could comment something, I would be very, very happy to hear it.
Well, it's your talk, Diego, but since you've actually asked me, yeah, actually, this is very well known. This is why so many recipes of the 14th and 15th centuries actually begin by instructing that you should clean the mercury by straining it multiple times through a leather bag. And that will get rid of a lot of the dross. And then after that, you can use other methods to clean it further. But probably these alchemists spent a lot of time grinding mercury, which takes a long time, straining it through various kinds of filter, leather, muslin, cheesecloth, to get it as fine as possible. And if you speak to Larry Principe, who I think has tried to do this in the modern age, he will tell you of the wearying hours that he's spent trying to clean mercury. And I gather it's a lot of really hard graft.
Thank you, Jennifer. Yes, actually, I was going to say that before, that in the text you can see the struggle of the author trying to explain what he has to do with mercury and with this purifying. So yes, actually, I maybe you saw that in the presentation. The alchemist was following the corpuscular views of Pseudo-Geber, the per minima thing. So this purification of matter has to go to reduce the density of the matter, and or rather augment the density of the matter by subtilizing the particles. So from the theoretical point of view, it's actually very interesting, and I will be very interested in see what happens in the practical part. Thank you.
Yeah,
I am all. Oh, sorry,
I
Peter.
just want
Go
to say
ahead.
one last comment. If you start looking about what mercury amalgam is, it starts becoming fascinating in its own right. That's another channel, and there are other texts about it. But the fact it doesn't behave like any other metal alloy is part of the reason why it's so problematic whenever anybody's trying to explain what it is. I can see Gary's delighted at that comment. We've been discussing this in the group about the fact that it's mercury crystal, mercury and gold. Why mercury absorbs gold is rather stranger than you would have expected. But I think it's also, that's what makes it so difficult to clean. And this idea about it becoming clean is really quite fascinating, that alchemists seem to be obsessed by it. That's me done.
Well, I'm aware of time, but there is actually there are two questions on YouTube that I want to pass on to you. Well, it's the same person actually. He's asking. So first, he's asking the critical edition of the Testamentum shows that there is a glossed version in Anglo-Norman. I wanted to know if you have also found two versions of the Codicillus by any chance, one shorter and one longer. By the way, he's presenting himself as Jose Rodriguez, so maybe you know him. I don't know, I'm just, or you make the acquaintance right now. And another question is, in the Testamentum, there is a very peculiar idea that is that of sunstroke, or the treatment of matter exposed to sunlight, which is actually quite not chemical practice. Have you found this idea in the Codicillus?
I haven't found a shorter or a longer version. Up until now, it's been the same in the manuscripts, although I am not making a critical edition, so I am not the full answer. And I haven't found that concept in the Codicillus. Again, the Codicillus is a short treatise, so probably many important ideas from the Testamentum were just left out in the Codicillus for the sake of clarity most of the time.
What about the use of sunlight for treating?
Yes, no, not that I remember. I would have to look, and I promise I will look. But no, up until now, I haven't found anything related to light or to sun. Maybe in the practical part there will be something, but I will have to investigate it further.
Oh, and one final question, if I may.
Yes, of course.
Well, I mean, you kept saying that the difference between theory and practice, and obviously, yes, I mean, you find this kind of, you know, scientific way of exposing things, which is quite interesting. You know, it's kind of a very neat way of presenting theory, and you kept saying that, well, it kind of breaks down in practice, and I just wanted to know if you would like to add a comment on that, in what sense you're thinking, and how is it breaking down?
Yes, I think that one of the most interesting aspects of alchemy, I think for the general reader and for myself, is the symbolic aspect, right? Especially later. In medieval alchemy, the symbolic aspect is less prominent, but there is still a symbolic aspect, I think. I think we cannot just forget that these alchemists were seeing the world and matter in a different way than we do, and in a different way that many modern alchemists did. So I think that the most external, schematic, theoretical part or aspect of the Codicillus, which is the one I presented to you, is very neat. It's very again, I think that it relates to numerology. I think it's not coincidence that there are two types of fire, 3 types of principles, each one in 4 parts. I think there is a numerology here, maybe Lullian numerology. So I think that the theory came after the practice. So probably this author took what he could from the practice and try to present it in the most neat way the author could. But the practice is another thing. I mean, I think the practical aspects, the laboratory aspects, are the most obscure. I am not a chemist, so I lack a lot of background to understand what is happening. But I think that the attempt or the will of the author was to offer a symbolic, theoretical, yes, but also a symbolic way of understanding alchemy. I do think that's the ultimate aim. Otherwise, it's very difficult to explain the numerology. It's difficult to explain many of the names, the terminology. I think the symbolic aspect is there, is in the theoretical part.
Well, thank you for really the entire thing. I mean, it was very nice and very clear, and the microphone paid off as well. We were talking about whether it's better with a microphone or without it. It's definitely, it's very nice. And we want to thank you for participating, and of course we look forward to outputs from your research.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody, for your time and for your questions and comments. It was great.
Okay, thank you. And may I remind you that next time Tom Willard, who I think is here, will be talking about Thomas Vaughan and the problematic of spiritual alchemy. So if you want to join us for that, there will be another interesting presentation, I think. And thank you everyone for participating and for asking these questions. And I'll see you next time. So, bye.
Goodbye.